My name is Delilah Mercer. I'm 31 years old. And the day my boyfriend's ex-girlfriend tried to move into my house began with a text message so absurd, I actually laughed before I realized she was serious. I work as an industrial equipment inspector. It pays well, it's steady, and it taught me something most people never learn, until life punishes them for it. If you ignore small structural failures, eventually something collapses. I bought my house 3 years ago with a little help from my parents on the down payment. It is mine. Not mine in the sentimental, decorative, sign over the entryway sense. Mine in the mortgage, tax bill, maintenance invoice. If the roof leaks, it's my problem sense. I live alone. Well, mostly alone. My boyfriend, Adrian Hale, stays over often enough that his toothbrush lives in my bathroom and half his black t-shirts seem to multiply in my laundry room. But officially, the house is still mine. That detail matters. It mattered more than I understood at the time. Adrian and I had been together a little over a year. He was thoughtful in a quiet way, the kind of man who noticed when I switched brands of coffee or when I was pretending not to be stressed. We were solid, not loud, not messy, solid. And somewhere in his past, before me, there had been Vesper. Vesper Calloway, the ex-girlfriend, the woman who apparently heard the word no and translated it into convince me in person. On a random Tuesday morning, I was standing in my kitchen with coffee in one hand and my work bag half zipped on the counter when my phone buzzed. Unknown number at first glance. Then I opened it. Hey, Delilah, it's Vesper. Big news. I got a job offer back in town, and I'm moving back this week. Adrian said you have more space than he does, so I was wondering if I could stay with you for just a couple of weeks while I apartment hunt. Temporary. No drama. I read it twice, then a third time. Adrian had not said that. I knew that immediately. First, because Adrian was not reckless enough to volunteer my home to his ex-girlfriend. Second, because Adrian had spent enough nights with me hearing me talk about boundaries to know I would rather host a raccoon infestation than invite an ex into my guest room. I texted him right away. Did you tell Vesper she could stay at my place? He replied less than a minute later. Absolutely not. Why is she texting you? Good question. A very bad sign. For context, Adrian and Vesper had dated for a couple of years before she moved away for graduate school. From everything he'd told me, it had ended cleanly. No cheating, no screaming. Just one of those adult endings people like to romanticize because nobody threw a drink. They stayed at that distant, polite level of post-breakup contact. Birthday messages, holiday texts, occasional social media reactions. The kind of weak, low-maintenance cordiality that only works as long as both people remember it is not intimacy. Apparently, Vesper did not remember that. Or didn't care. I kept my reply simple. Congratulations on the job, but that won't work. You'll need to make other arrangements. A few seconds later, we're adults. It's not weird. Just temporary. Adrian and I ended on good terms, and I thought since you two are serious, you'd understand. That one irritated me more than it should have. The presumption. The little built-in guilt trap. As if saying no meant I was insecure. As if basic self-protection was some embarrassing flaw she could frame as emotional immaturity. I typed back, no, I'm not comfortable with that. Good luck with the move. She answered almost immediately. Wow, didn't realize you were threatened by me. It's been years. There it was. Not surprise. Not disappointment. Punishment. The classic move people pull when your boundary inconveniences them. Recast your no as proof that something is wrong with you. I stared at the screen, feeling my jaw tighten. Then I wrote, I'm not threatened. I'm just not interested in sharing my home with my boyfriend's ex. This conversation is over. She sent one final message. Fine, I'll figure it out myself. I remember exhaling and setting my phone face down on the counter, genuinely relieved. Problem solved. Boundary established. Done. It should have ended there. It never does with people like that. A few days later, I got home around 6 in the evening. Long day. Steel-toed boots. Hair tied back too tight. A headache already pressing behind my eyes. I pulled into my driveway and noticed the front door before I even got out of the car. Not wide open. Just cracked. Barely. Enough to make every nerve in my body go alert. I froze with one hand, still on the steering wheel. My first thought was burglary. My second was Adrian. Maybe he'd stopped by and forgotten to lock up. But Adrian was out of town that week for work. 2 states away, sleeping in some business hotel, and sending me photos of terrible room service burgers. So no, not Adrian. I got out slowly, set my bag down on the porch, reached into it for my phone. The house was too quiet, but not really quiet. There was a shrill, relentless noise underneath the silence, something metallic and urgent that my brain took half a second too long to register. Smoke detectors. Then I smelled it. Burning. Chemical. Wrong. I pushed the door wider with the heel of my boot and stepped inside. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like a second pulse in my throat. My palms were already damp. I actually grabbed the decorative bat I kept near the entry table, which up until that moment had existed mostly to make me feel prepared in the abstract. Abstract vanished fast. The air hit my face hot and sour. Smoke curled along the ceiling in dirty gray ribbons. My eyes started watering instantly. For context, and this is the part that still makes me furious when I replay it, my younger sister Noelle had been staying with me until about a month earlier. She'd had a spare key while she was getting back on her feet, which in practice meant sleeping in my guest room rent-free for 8 months while contributing almost nothing except dirty mugs and half-finished plans. I had meant to get the key back, meant to change the locks, meant to stop putting it off because surely no one in my own family would be stupid enough to hand access to my home to somebody else. That particular illusion was about to die in spectacular fashion. The kitchen was on fire. Not an exaggeration. Not a little oven flare-up. Actual flames climbing the backsplash behind the stove, black smoke rising in thick waves, the cabinet above the range scorched and blistering. The overhead suppression canister had already gone off, coating half the room in white powder. Flour had mixed with it on the countertops into a gummy pale sludge. Sugar was scattered across the granite like broken glass. Mixing bowls sat everywhere. A carton of eggs sweated beside the sink. The oven door was shut, but orange heat pulsed through the glass like the thing inside was trying to claw its way out. It looked like someone had started baking, got distracted by their own audacity, and let the whole room turn apocalyptic. And standing in the middle of it, just beyond the edge of the smoke, was Vesper, mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks, flour on her blouse, soot on her arms. 3 enormous suitcases lined up beside my living room wall, moving boxes stacked neatly in the corner. Her phone charger already plugged into my outlet, a decorative pillow on my couch that definitely did not belong to me. She had not arrived like a guest. She had staged herself like a resident. And then she smiled. Actually smiled. Like this was chaotic, yes, but also somehow charming. Like we were already deep enough into the story that she expected me to play along. "Surprise," she said with a breathless little laugh. "I was making you a thank you cake for letting me stay, and something went weird with the oven. I think the temperature setting is broken." For 1 full second, maybe 2, I could not process what I was seeing. It was too absurd, too invasive, too insane in a way that almost resisted belief. Part of me wanted there to be some explanation I had not yet found, some missing piece that would make the image in front of me rearrange itself into something rational. There wasn't one. There never is. "I didn't let you stay," I said. My voice came out flatter than I felt. Maybe that was shock. Maybe instinct. "I told you no, more than once. What the hell are you doing in my house?" She blinked at me like I was being unnecessarily difficult. "Your sister let me in. She gave me the spare key. She said you were just being stubborn, and that once I was actually here, you'd calm down." The sentence landed like ice water. Noelle. Of course. Sweet, irresponsible, boundaryless Noelle, who had a talent for acting like other people's property, was just community theater with furniture. I stared at Vesper. She kept talking, casual as weather. "Honestly, I think she was right. I mean, this is awkward, sure, but not impossible. And I thought a cake would help. Chocolate raspberry. Adrian said it used to be your favorite." The way she said Adrian's name made something go still inside me. Not jealousy, not insecurity. Strategy. She expected an emotional reaction, a fight, tears, raised voices, something she could twist later into a different story. But the truth was already standing in front of me, covered in flour and smoke, holding itself together badly. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened the camera. At first she didn't notice. I slowly panned the room. Her face, the key in her hand. The suitcases, the boxes, the smoke-blackened cabinets, the ruined kitchen, the white suppression dust, the oven. Evidence, not a conversation. A timeline. She was still talking when I pointed the phone more directly at her. "I really did think you'd appreciate the gesture," she said. "Noelle told me you say no first when you're stressed, but you don't always mean it." That did it. Say that again. Her smile faltered. "The part about Noelle giving you the key." She hesitated, then shrugged. "Your sister gave me the spare and told me you'd warm up once I was here." She finally noticed the camera. Her expression changed instantly. "Wait," she said, "are you recording this?" I looked at her through the screen. Yes. The smile vanished. Completely. For the first time since I'd walked in, she looked afraid. Good, because behind her, the flames were starting to spread higher along the cabinet edge, and the ceiling paint above the stove had begun to bubble from the heat. This was no longer trespassing with luggage. This was destruction. I stepped backward toward the entryway and dialed 911. Her whole body tensed. "Wait, what are you doing? Delilah, don't do that. You don't need to call anybody. It's just a small kitchen fire. I said I'll pay for it." I kept my eyes on the growing smoke. "You broke into my house and set my kitchen on fire." "It was an accident. You were not supposed to be here. Can we please just handle this privately, like adults?" I almost laughed at that. Adults. People love that word when they mean, let me avoid consequences. I gave the dispatcher my address. described the active fire, and said clearly that the person inside the home had entered without permission after repeated written refusals. Vesper's face drained of color. Outside, the evening had started to darken. By the time I moved into the driveway, still on the phone, neighbors were already peeking through windows and stepping onto porches. Smoke pushed out through the kitchen vent in thick, ugly waves. Vesper hovered near the doorway behind me, cycling through panic, apology, and disbelief so quickly it would have been impressive if I hadn't wanted her off my property and out of my life. She tried 3 different approaches in less than 5 minutes. First, the tearful one. Please don't do this. I was just trying to do something nice. Then the practical one. I'll pay for everything. I swear. There's no reason to ruin my life over this. Then the offended one. You are seriously overreacting. I didn't answer, because something in me had finally understood the situation. People like Vesper survive by getting you to stay inside the emotional fog with them. Keep talking. Keep reacting. Keep defending yourself. Keep forgetting what actually happened while they rearrange the meaning of it in real time. So I stopped participating. The fire trucks arrived about 12 minutes later. Felt like an hour. 2 engines, lights washing red over the street and the front of my house. Firefighters moved fast, disappearing into the smoke with a kind of practiced focus that made the whole scene suddenly feel more real, not less. One of my neighbors offered me a garden hose like that was going to help at that point. Another one had her phone out, recording from across the lawn. Good, I thought. Let there be witnesses. Let there be records. Let it exist outside whatever story Vesper planned to tell later. I stood there in my work boots, smoke in my hair, phone still in my hand, and watched my kitchen die, while the woman who had done it kept trying to convince me I was the unreasonable one. And somewhere underneath the panic, underneath the anger, underneath the shock, a colder thought began to form. This was bigger than a ruined room, because someone had let her in, someone I had trusted, someone who thought my no did not matter if they disagreed with it. By the time the police arrived, I already knew one thing for certain. I was done arguing with people who treated access to my life like a right. The fire department was still moving through the house when the police arrived. 2 officers, one older, one younger, both wearing the same expression people get when they already know the next hour of their lives is going to involve paperwork, conflicting stories, and someone insisting they are the real victim. By then, my driveway looked like a neighborhood crime documentary. Flashing lights, smoke drifting into the evening air, my front windows fogged with gray haze, a cluster of neighbors pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Vesper stood a few feet away from me on the lawn, with her arms folded around herself like she was the one who had been violated. Her 3 oversized suitcases were still inside my living room, lined up obediently by the wall, mute evidence that this had never been a misunderstanding. You do not arrive with that much luggage because you plan to stay a couple of nights. You arrive like that when you believe you have successfully inserted yourself into someone else's life. The older officer introduced himself, asked if anyone was injured, then separated us immediately. Good. I had no interest in hearing Vesper start performing remorse in surround sound. I stood near the curb with the younger officer and handed over my phone. He scrolled through the text first, face neutral, thumb moving slowly over each message where I had told her no. Clearly. More than once. No double meanings. No vague, maybe later. No room for interpretation unless you were committed to misunderstanding on purpose. He paused at one part and glanced up at me. So you explicitly refused to let her stay? Yes. Multiple times? Yes. He nodded once, then kept reading. I could see Vesper in my peripheral vision talking to the other officer near the porch steps, using her hands a lot, crying at convenient intervals. Even from a distance, I recognized the rhythm of it. Confusion, apology, soft voice, tilted head. The choreography of a woman who had spent her life mistaking manipulation for charm. The younger officer handed my phone back. You said you also have video? I do. I opened the recording and played it for him. Not the whole thing. Just enough. Her face, the key in her hand, the luggage, the smoke damage, and most importantly, her voice saying that my sister had given her the spare key and told her I would warm up once she was already inside. The officer watched it once, then again. Then he called his partner over. The older officer watched without interrupting, his expression flattening in that very specific way authority does when a situation becomes simpler than expected. Not emotionally simpler, legally simpler. He handed the phone back to me. And this sister, he asked, she had permission to give out access to your house? No. She used to live with me temporarily. I forgot to get the key back. Did you authorize anyone to let Ms. Calloway enter your home today? No. He made a note. And the fire? She says she was baking. That almost got a reaction out of him. Almost. Behind us, one of the firefighters came down the porch steps pulling off a glove. He spoke briefly with the older officer, low enough that I couldn't hear most of it, but I caught a few phrases. Active heat in the oven. Suppression deployed. Upper cabinet loss. Lucky it didn't spread faster. Lucky? That word irritated me. People use it after disasters to make ruins sound survivable, as if the fact that things could have been worse is supposed to make you feel better about how bad they already are. The younger officer asked a few more questions. Did I want her trespassed from the property? Did I want to press charges? Did I have somewhere else to stay tonight if the house turned out to be uninhabitable? That second question was the easiest one of the evening. Yes, I said, whatever applies. Not dramatic, not shouted, just true. Across the lawn, Vesper's entire posture changed the moment she realized what was happening. Until then, I think some part of her still believed this was a messy interpersonal conflict, something feminine and private and negotiable, something that could be talked down if she cried hard enough and used enough soft words. But consequences have a sound when they arrive. Not loud, just final. The older officer walked over to her and spoke quietly. I watched her face change in stages. First disbelief, then offense, then panic. You can't be serious, she said, loud enough for me and probably half the block to hear. It was an accident. I was trying to make a cake. No one answered that with the sympathy she wanted. The officer kept speaking. Then came the phrase that snapped whatever composure she had left. You're being detained. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nobody goes to jail over a cake. That time the older officer did answer. Ma'am, this isn't about cake. Number. It wasn't. It was about trespassing. Property destruction. Unauthorized entry. A fire in my kitchen because a woman I did not invite had decided my refusal was just the first round of a negotiation. They walked her to the patrol car while neighbors watched openly now, no longer pretending to be discreet. Someone across the street definitely had their phone out. A child on a bicycle had stopped at the corner and was staring with the solemn curiosity children reserve for adult disasters. Vesper twisted once before getting in. Delilah, please, she called. You know I didn't mean for this to happen. The thing about meaning is that it matters less and less the more damage you leave behind. I didn't reply. They put her in the back seat and shut the door. And just like that, the woman who had walked into my house, smiling like she was starring in a romantic miscommunication, was reduced to a figure behind glass, lit by police lights, crying into consequences. I wish I could say I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt exhausted. Adrenaline had already started to leave my body in sharp, unpleasant waves. My hands were trembling now that there was no practical reason for them to stay steady. My clothes smelled like smoke and chemical suppressant. My eyes burned. Every time I inhaled, I got a little more of the fire in my throat. One of the firefighters came back over. Kitchen's basically gone, he said, with the bluntness of someone too tired to offer comforting lies. You'll need a police report for insurance. We had to put a lot of water through the area, so there's secondary damage too. Of course there was. Why stop at fire when water could also have its turn? I thanked him anyway. Because he hadn't caused it. Because he was just the messenger. Because once you are in the middle of a mess this big, gratitude becomes oddly selective. You hand it out to anyone who is not actively making your life worse. When the patrol car finally pulled away with Vesper inside, I stood in the driveway, staring at my house as if it belonged to someone else. The front looked normal enough from the outside, which somehow made it worse. People always think disaster announces itself properly. They expect collapse to look dramatic from every angle, but most wreckage is private, contained. A nightmare that exists in one room while the rest of the structure stands there pretending nothing has changed. My phone buzzed. Noelle. I answered on the first ring. What happened? She asked, already sounding annoyed, which was impressive considering she was the reason I was standing in a smoke-damaged driveway in the first place. I didn't ease into it. Vesper was arrested. My kitchen is destroyed. She had your key. Silence. Then, unbelievably, a short laugh. Not nervous. Not confused. Dismissive. You're being dramatic. I closed my eyes. Smoke still stung behind them. She broke into my house. She didn't break in if she had a key. You gave her my key after I told her no. Oh my God, Delilah. Her voice sharpened with irritated impatience. You always do this. You make everything so intense. She just needed somewhere to land for a little while. Adrian said you were stubborn, but I didn't think you'd act insane. That got my attention in a new way. Adrian did not say that. Well, maybe not in those exact words, but come on. She's his ex, not a serial killer. My grip tightened around the phone. She set my kitchen on fire. It was a little kitchen fire. Insurance covers that. I stared at the blackened edge of my window frame while she said that. A little kitchen fire. People who never pay for anything always speak in diminutives. A little fire, a little favor, a little misunderstanding. Language gets smaller and smaller the farther they are from the cost. She had luggage, I said. 3 suitcases, boxes. She moved into my house. Noelle sighed like I was exhausting her. She was going to explain once you got home. You're impossible when you feel cornered, and I knew if she just got in the door, you'd calm down. There it was, the real philosophy underneath all of it. Not that I would agree, that my agreement was optional, that no from me meant maybe to everyone else, as long as they thought their intentions were good enough to override it. We're done, I said. What? You are not coming back to my house, ever, and I'm speaking to a lawyer tomorrow. Her voice went cold. You can't do that to your own sister. Watch me, I thought. Out loud, I said, you gave someone unauthorized access to my home. That's not a misunderstanding. That's part of the damage. She started talking over me immediately, faster and louder, the way she always did when reality stopped flattering her. So now you're going to ruin my life too? Over this? Over one accident? I hung up. Not dramatically, just decisively. She called back twice. I let it ring. Then I texted Adrian. Call me when you can. It's serious. He called less than 2 minutes later. I stepped farther down the driveway, away from the neighbors, away from the firefighters, away from the house that no longer felt safe. What happened? He asked, voice tight. I told him everything. Not elegantly. Not in order. Just the facts as they spilled out. The text. The open door. The fire. The suitcases. Noelle. The arrest. There was a long silence when I finished. Then very quietly, she used my name. Yes. I never told her to contact you. I never told her she could stay there, Delilah. I swear to God. I know. And I did know. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that chaos often arrives through people you are only loosely connected to. Not always because your partner betrays you. Sometimes because his history leaves a crack in the wall and the wrong woman sees it. I'm coming back tonight, Adrian said. You're out of state. I don't care. You have work tomorrow. I said I'm coming back. I pressed my fingers to my forehead. Part of me wanted him there. Part of me did not want one more person near this until I understood how ugly it was going to get. Drive safe, I said finally. That was as close to yes as I could manage. By the time the police finished with me, the house had been declared unsafe for the night. Too much smoke. Too much water. Too much uncertainty around the electrical system. I could go in briefly with an escort and grab essentials, but that was it. So I did. I stepped back into my house with one of the firefighters behind me and walked through the wreckage that had been my evening. The kitchen looked worse now that the flames were out. Not dramatic anymore. Just ruined. The cabinets above the stove were warped and split. White suppressant powder clung to everything. The countertops were streaked with soot and wet flour paste. Water had spread across the floor and into the baseboards. A dish towel lay half-burned by the sink like evidence from a scene too stupid to deserve this much destruction. In the living room, Vesper's luggage still stood by the wall. I looked at it for a long moment, then at the firefighter. What happens to that? He glanced over. Police will sort it out if needed. Don't touch anything until they clear it. Fine. Let her ridiculous suitcases sit there like an installation piece called Consequences of Delusion. I grabbed a duffel bag from the hall closet and packed with the numb efficiency of someone trying not to think. Laptop, phone charger, prescription bottle, toothbrush, clean jeans, a sweater, my folder with the house paperwork, my spare external hard drive. Then, on instinct, I went back to the kitchen entry and took photos from 3 angles. The room, the floor, the cabinets, the oven, the overall damage, close-ups, wide shots, details. Because if this had taught me anything already, it was that people lie more easily when there are no timestamps. When I came back outside, the street had mostly emptied. The show was over. The audience had gone home. I stood by my car and emailed the photos to myself. Then the text screenshots. Then the video. Then I backed everything up to cloud storage. By the time I got to a hotel around 10:30, I had smoke in my lungs, a police report number saved in my notes app, and a folder on my laptop labeled simply, Case. The room cost $120 a night and happened to be directly beside the ice machine and the elevator, which felt almost insulting in its mediocrity. If my life was going to implode, I would at least have liked better lighting. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down without turning on the television. The silence in hotel rooms is never really silence. It hums. Air vent, hallway footsteps, distant plumbing. Anonymous lives stacked near yours, each one temporary. My phone buzzed again. Noelle. Not calling now. Texting. I cannot believe you had her arrested. She's crying and had to call her parents for bail. You ruined her life over a cake. I read it twice, then once more, because I wanted to fully absorb the scale of the delusion. Over a cake. As if all the words before the word cake vanished the second she typed it. Not trespass. Not unauthorized entry. Not property damage. Not active fire. Cake. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I screenshotted the message and saved it to the folder. Then another text came in. Mom wants to talk to you. Of course she did. Families like mine love a crisis, but only if they can control the narrative before the facts settle. Somewhere in my mother's mind, I was already becoming difficult, cruel, rigid, the kind of daughter who valued rules more than relationships. My phone rang. Mom. I answered because some part of me was still foolish enough to think she might surprise me. She didn't. Delilah, what on earth have you done? Not are you okay? Not is the house all right? Not did anyone get hurt? Straight to accusation. I leaned back against the stiff hotel headboard and stared at the ugly, abstract art on the wall. She broke into my house and set my kitchen on fire. It was an accident. She was not supposed to be there. She was trying to do something nice. The calm left me then. Not explosively, just all at once. No, I said. She was trying to force herself into my home after I told her no. Mom let out a long breath like I was a child she'd grown tired of correcting. That girl was part of Adrian's life for years. She has been around this family. She is not a stranger. I almost laughed. This family. What exactly had Vesper been to my mother? A guest at holidays? A pleasant face in photographs? A useful opportunity to perform warmth? She is not family to me. She was trying to bake for you. She brought luggage, Mom. She moved into my living room. Well, clearly she panicked. She just got back to town. People make mistakes. I looked down at my soot-marked sleeve. At the black smudge I had somehow carried from my house into the hotel. The thing about mistakes is that everyone wants grace for theirs while treating yours like character flaws. Vesper's mistake was apparently human. My mistake, enforcing a boundary, was apparently cruelty. I'm not dropping anything, I said. There was silence on the line. Then her voice sharpened. You are being vindictive. No, I'm being done. Done with what? With all of you acting like my home exists for other people's convenience. That landed. Hard enough that she went quiet for a second. Then, predictably, she reached for guilt. I did not raise you to be this cold. I looked around the hotel room. The bland curtains, the scratchy bedspread, the lamp with the crooked shade. No, I said. You raised me to think I had to say yes whenever somebody made me feel bad enough. She inhaled sharply. Then came the line I should have expected. You are tearing this family apart. No. The truth was simpler and uglier than that. I was refusing to hold together something rotten. My father got on the phone next. The peacemaker. The soft-voiced ambassador of surrender. Sweetheart, he said carefully, maybe just take a breath before this goes any further. Too late. It had already gone very far. Dad, she entered my house without permission and there was a fire. I know, but... No, don't but this. He fell silent. I could hear my mother in the background. Not her words, just the pressure of her presence shaping his. He tried again. Would it really hurt to be flexible right now? Flexible. That word. The family synonym for self-erasure. I closed my eyes and let the answer come from the most exhausted part of me. Yes, I said, it would. He didn't reply. A few seconds later, the call ended. I sat there with my phone in my lap and realized something sharp and clarifying. This was not about Vesper anymore. Not really. Vesper had lit the match, yes. But the system around her was older than she was. A whole web of people who believed boundaries were rude if they inconvenienced the wrong person. People who heard no and immediately started searching for someone softer to override it. Noelle with the key. Mom with the excuses. Dad with the surrender dressed up as peace. Maybe even Vesper herself moving through the world like access was something she could charm, borrow, or force. Fine. If they wanted a villain because I refused to be a doormat, I could survive that. But I was done arguing my way through it. From that point on, I was going to document, file, preserve, escalate. I called the after-hours insurance line just before midnight and spent 45 minutes on hold listening to a synthetic piano loop that sounded like emotional punishment. When a tired-sounding representative finally answered, she gave me a claim number, told me an adjuster would contact me in 5 to 7 business days, and suggested I keep receipts for all temporary housing costs. I thanked her. Wrote everything down. Then I made one more stop before trying to sleep. A hardware store still open late. I bought new locks, a flashlight, and a cheap screwdriver set, because my house might have been damaged, but if I was going back there tomorrow, one thing was changing immediately. No one who had ever confused my kindness with access was getting through my front door again. I got back to the hotel after 11, sat on the carpet with a YouTube tutorial playing on my phone, and laid out the lock kit beside my bag. Not because I could install it there, because I needed to see the pieces, needed the visual promise of something I could control. By midnight, I had a backup folder full of evidence, a claim number, 3 missed calls from Noelle, 1 unread text from my mother, and a rising certainty that none of them understood what was coming. That was fine. They would. I stopped arguing the next morning. That was the shift. Not emotional, not dramatic, just efficient. There's a moment in situations like this where you realize conversation is no longer a tool. It becomes a trap. Every word you say gets twisted, minimized, or reframed until you're defending something you never even agreed to. So I stopped defending, and I started filing. Day 3, I hired a lawyer. His name was Marcus Reeves, mid-50s, calm in a way that suggested he had seen every possible variation of human stupidity and no longer found any of it surprising. He didn't waste time on sympathy or outrage. He dealt in facts, timelines, and outcomes. which was exactly what I needed. We sat across from each other in a small office that smelled faintly like coffee and paper, and I laid everything out. The texts, the video, the police report, the photos, the calls from my family, the messages from Noel. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making small notes in a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and tapped his pen once against the paper. "Good," he said. I blinked. "Good? You documented early," he clarified. "Most people don't. They wait until things get worse, then try to reconstruct what happened. You started building a record immediately. That makes my job easier." That was the first moment since the fire that something felt solid. Not fixed, but anchored. "What happens now?" I asked. He laid it out in a way that stripped the emotion clean out of it. 2 tracks, criminal and civil. The state handles criminal. You don't control that. You cooperate, provide evidence, let them decide how to prosecute. And civil? That's where we focus. Insurance pays first. Then they go after her to recover the cost. It's called subrogation. You don't chase her. You let a company that specializes in chasing people do it for you. There was something almost elegant about that. Cold, but effective. "And my sister?" I asked. His expression didn't change, but his pen paused for a fraction of a second. "She provided unauthorized access to your property," he said. "That puts her in the chain of liability. We don't lead with that, but we don't ignore it either." I nodded slowly, because that was the truth no one else in my family seemed willing to say out loud. Noelle wasn't just involved. She was part of the reason this happened at all. "From this point forward," Reeves continued, "you document everything. Every expense, every message, every interaction. You don't engage emotionally. You don't argue. You don't explain. You collect." Collect. I like that word. It felt controlled, intentional, like I was no longer reacting to chaos, but organizing it. I left his office with a checklist instead of confusion. That helped, more than anything else had so far. The house still smelled like smoke, even after the fire was out, even after the initial cleanup. Smoke gets into things, into fabric, into walls, into the spaces you don't think about until you realize they exist. I went back that afternoon with a contractor to assess the damage. He walked through the kitchen slowly, hands on his hips, doing that quiet mental math professionals do when they're translating destruction into invoices. "Cabinets are gone," he said finally. "We're not salvaging those. Countertops need replacing, appliances too. Smoke remediation throughout. And the water." He pointed toward the base of the cabinets. "That's going to spread if we don't address it fast." "How much?" I asked. He hesitated. "Ballpark? 30 to 40,000. I nodded. Because at that point, numbers had started to feel abstract. 30,000, 40,000. It was all just another way of saying this wasn't small. Behind me, the living room still held the ghost of Vesper's attempted move-in. The indentation on the couch where she'd sat. The outlet where her charger had been plugged in. The space near the wall where her suitcases had stood before the police removed them. I took more photos. Different angles. Different lighting. Because the first set had been shock. This set was documentation. Day 6. I came home to a bright yellow notice taped to my front door. Code enforcement. Anonymous complaint. Illegal rental activity. I stood there reading it twice, then a third time, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Of course it wasn't over. Of course she hadn't stopped. The notice required an inspection, which meant time off work, which meant more disruption, which meant exactly what people like Vesper aim for when they realize they're losing control. Create enough friction that you give up just to make it stop. I didn't give up. I called Reeves. He listened, then said simply, "Good." I almost laughed. "Good?" "Pattern," he said. "Harassment? Keep the notice. Document the timing." So I did. The inspection got rescheduled twice before it actually happened. When the inspector finally walked through the house, it took him less than 10 minutes to conclude what was obvious. "No signs of rental activity," he said, scribbling on his clipboard. "This is unfounded." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "False complaints like this can be a misdemeanor. We document them." Another piece. Another entry in the growing file. Day 9. My boss called me into his office. He closed the door behind me, which he almost never did. "Got a strange call yesterday," he said. My stomach tightened. "What kind of call?" "Someone asking to verify your employment. Female voice. Wanted salary details. Length of employment. Said it was for a housing situation." I didn't need to ask who. "I assume you didn't give them anything." "Of course not," he said. "But I wanted to flag it. It felt off." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." He studied my face for a second. "Everything okay?" No, nothing was okay. But I had already learned that explaining made things messier, not clearer. "I'm handling it," I said. And for the first time, that wasn't just something I said to reassure other people. It was true. I forwarded the information to Reeves. His response came back within the hour. "This helps. Establishes ongoing behavior. Keep a record. Pattern. Again." Everything she did to pressure me was becoming evidence against her. She just didn't realize it yet. Day 11. The insurance adjuster finally arrived. He walked through this house with a camera and a clipboard, documenting everything with clinical detachment. Every burn mark, every water stain, every warped surface. He didn't comment much. Just took photos, made notes, occasionally asked for clarification. How long was the fire active? Fire department response time? Any prior damage to this area? By the time he left, the kitchen looked less like a disaster and more like a case study. A file. A set of numbers waiting to be calculated. Report in 2 to 3 weeks, he said before heading out. Of course it would be weeks. Everything important always took time. Everything destructive happened fast. By the end of the second week, I had stopped thinking of myself as someone dealing with a bad situation. I was building something. A case. A timeline. A structure that would hold, even if everyone around me kept pretending nothing serious had happened. Reeves drafted cease and desist letters for both Vesper and Noelle. Formal, direct, unambiguous, stop contacting, stop interfering, stop attempting to access, or face escalation. I read them twice before sending them out. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing my boundaries translated into legal language. Not emotional, not negotiable, just enforceable. I also started locking everything down. Bank accounts, email, phone, passwords changed, two-factor authentication on everything. Fraud alerts activated because Reeves had said something that stuck with me. People who lose control escalate in unpredictable ways. I wasn't going to be surprised again. Day 23. The insurance report came back. $34,000. Itemized, detailed, clinical, cabinet replacement, appliance replacement, smoke remediation, water damage repair, suppression system reset. Each line felt like a translation of chaos into accountability. Each number a step closer to making someone else answer for what had happened. Contractor bids came in shortly after. 3 estimates. $28,000 to $41,000 depending on materials and upgrades. One of them actually suggested adding a wine fridge. I stared at him for a second before saying, "My kitchen just burned down." He nodded awkwardly. Right, of course. People are strange. They see destruction and immediately start imagining upgrades, as if the solution to loss is better countertops. I was still living in the hotel, still waking up at 2 in the morning to the ice machine, still getting interrupted at 6 by housekeeping knocking, despite the do not disturb sign. Every night, I added another receipt to the folder. Every morning, I added another note. Date, time, expense. Because if this was going to be a process, I was going to run it properly. By week 3, something inside me had fully settled. Not peace, not forgiveness, clarity. I wasn't dealing with the misunderstanding. I wasn't dealing with the difficult person. I was dealing with someone who believed access was something she could take, and a family who believed my refusal didn't matter if it made them uncomfortable. That combination was never going to resolve through conversation, only through consequences. And I was done being the person who absorbed damage just to keep the peace. Now I was the person documenting it, building it, preparing it, because sooner or later, all of this was going to come together. And when it did, I wasn't going to be the one scrambling to explain what happened. I was going to be the one with proof. 5 weeks after the fire, my phone buzzed while I was sitting in the hotel lobby, halfway through a coffee I didn't even want. Motion detected, front door camera. I had installed the camera the week after everything happened. One of those things I should have done sooner, like changing the locks, like not trusting that people would respect boundaries just because I explained them clearly. I opened the app and froze. 4 people stood on my porch. My mother, my father, my sister Noelle, and Vesper. For a second, my brain refused to process it. Not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because the audacity of it was so complete, it felt almost staged, like a bad scene written by someone who didn't understand how real consequences worked. Then my heart started beating faster. Not panic. Recognition. Because I knew exactly what this was. An ambush. A family conversation. A coordinated attempt to overwhelm me in person, to force emotion back into a situation I had already moved into documentation and law. I zoomed in. My mother was holding a piece of paper. Of course she was. She always prepared speeches when she thought she needed to win. Noelle stood beside her, already on her phone, thumbs moving, probably updating someone in real time about how unreasonable I was being. My father stood slightly behind them, hands in his pockets, wearing that same expression he had worn my entire life whenever my mother decided something was going to happen, whether anyone else agreed or not. Present, but not involved. And Vesper stood closest to the door. Too close. Close enough that the camera caught every detail of her face. She looked smaller than the last time I had seen her. Not physically, energetically, but the performance was still there. Even now, even after arrest, even after charges, even after a restraining order had been served to her less than 2 weeks earlier. She raised her hand and knocked. Once. Twice. Then harder. "Delilah," my mother called. I know you can see this. Open the door. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. Every instinct in my body told me to drive over there, to stand in front of them, to finally say everything I had not said, to unload weeks of frustration, anger, disbelief, to make them understand. But that was exactly what they wanted. A scene. Something emotional. Something messy they could twist later. Instead, I did the one thing none of them expected. I called Reeves. He picked up on the second ring. Tell me you're calling with something interesting, he said. They're at my house, I said. A beat. Who is they? My parents, my sister, and Vesper. Silence. Then, you're kidding. I wish I was. Another pause. The restraining order was served 10 days ago, he said slowly. I know. Do not go there, he said immediately. Do not engage. Do not respond. Let them stay on camera. I glanced back at the screen. My mother was knocking again, louder now. Delilah, this is ridiculous. Open the door. I'm not planning to go, I said. Good, Reeves replied. I'm calling this in. Perfect. I set the phone down and turned my attention back to the feed. And just watched. My mother switched from knocking to pounding. The paper in her hand crumpled slightly with each hit. Delilah, we are not leaving until you open this door. Noelle muttered something beside her, then glanced directly at the camera and rolled her eyes. Vesper stepped forward. Closer. Always closer. She looked straight into the lens. Her face shifted, softened. Tears appeared almost on cue. Delilah, please, she said, voice trembling. I know you're watching. I'm so sorry for everything. Can we just talk? I'll pay for the damage. I'll do anything you want. Please just drop the charges. There it was. Not accountability. Not understanding. A transaction. I'll do anything if you stop. Even now, she wasn't apologizing for what she had done. She was trying to negotiate her way out of consequences. Behind her, my father shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing toward the driveway like he was hoping someone else would take over the situation. Noelle kept texting. My mother kept knocking. The whole thing felt surreal, like I was watching my own life through a screen, disconnected from it in a way that made everything clearer. Then Vesper did something that almost made me laugh. She waved at the camera. Actually waved. Then pressed her hands together in a pleading gesture like she was performing for an audience. Which, in a way, she was. She just didn't realize the audience wasn't sympathetic. It was legal, time-stamped, recorded, and very, very patient. The police arrived 10 minutes later. 2 cars, 4 officers. I watched as the entire dynamic shifted the second Vesper saw them. She stepped back, quickly, not running, but not casual either, trying to create distance, trying to undo what had already been captured. Too late. One of the officers intercepted her before she reached the sidewalk. She started crying immediately. Again. The switch was so fast it was almost mechanical. My mother stepped forward, voice rising. There's been a misunderstanding. The officer held up a hand. Ma'am, we need you to step back. This is a family matter. Step back. My father said nothing. Of course he didn't. Noelle started talking. Loud. Fast. This is ridiculous. She's the one harassing everyone with legal nonsense. This is all her fault. The officer writing notes didn't even look up. Just kept writing. Documenting. Because that's the thing people never understand. When you talk to the police, you are not convincing them. You are giving them material, and they will decide what matters. Vesper was arrested again, right there on my front lawn. Second time in just over a month. This time for violating a protective order. I watched her face as they explained it. Shock, fear, anger, all layered together. But I was just trying to apologize, she said. No one answered that. Because the order didn't care about her intentions. It cared about her presence. And she was exactly where she wasn't supposed to be. After they put her in the patrol car, my father finally pulled out his phone. A few seconds later, mine rang. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Delilah, he said, voice tight. This has gone too far. I leaned back in my chair again. Watched the officers still moving around my porch through the camera. She violated a restraining order, I said. We didn't know about that. Maybe true, maybe not. Didn't matter. You brought her to my house, I said. That's on you. She just wanted to apologize. That's not how that works. Silence. Then softer. You could end this, drop everything, let everyone move on. Number. That was the old version of me. The one who thought peace was something you preserved by absorbing damage. I'm not doing that, I said. Your mother is very upset, he added. Of course she was. She had organized this. Expected it to work. Expected me to fold. Then maybe she shouldn't have planned an ambush, I said. He didn't reply. A second later, the call ended. Sunday morning, everything escalated. Not legally. Socially. My phone started buzzing nonstop. Messages. Notifications. Tags. Noelle had posted a long emotional story about her cruel sister tearing the family apart over an accident. There was a selfie. Tears. Perfect lighting. The comments were immediate. Relatives. People I hadn't spoken to in years. Strangers who somehow felt qualified to have opinions. She's always been cold. Family should forgive. This is so sad to watch. Money matters more than people to some of you. I scrolled through it once, then stopped. Because engaging would do exactly what they wanted. Turn this into a public argument, a performance. Instead, I took screenshots. Every post, every comment, every accusation. Then I sent them to Reeves. His reply came back quickly. Good, keep them coming. Of course. Even their attempt to shame me publicly, was becoming part of the case. That was the moment everything fully locked into place for me. They thought they were overwhelming me, pressuring me, forcing me to respond. But all they were really doing was documenting their own behavior in real time, on record, with witnesses, with timestamps, with evidence. They weren't burying me. They were building something. They just didn't realize who it belonged to. And by then, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was waiting. Restitution, retraction, and the cost of ignoring no. Month 2 felt quieter, not peaceful. Just quieter in the way storms feel once they move past the point of immediate destruction and settle into aftermath. Everything slows down, but nothing is resolved yet. You're just standing in what's left, waiting to see what holds and what collapses next. The preliminary hearing came and went without drama. No speeches, no emotional confrontations. Just paperwork, a judge flipping through documents, a few questions to the prosecutor, and a decision to move forward. Bound over for trial. Next case. It was almost insulting in its simplicity. After everything that had happened, I had expected something more cinematic. Instead, it was procedural, efficient, cold, which I realized was exactly what I needed, because emotion had never helped me here. Process did. The restraining order violation moved faster. It was cleaner. No interpretation required. She had been served. She had shown up anyway. And she had done it on camera. Reeves called it gift-wrapped evidence. I didn't argue with that. By month 4, it ended the way most cases like this end. Not with a dramatic courtroom showdown. With a plea deal. Vesper pled to criminal trespass and property destruction. The fire itself, the arson angle, got dropped in favor of charges that were easier to prove without arguing intent. Reeves explained it over coffee like he was walking me through a checklist. Prosecutors don't chase difficult wins when they already have clean ones, he said. They go for certainty. Certainty looked like this. 18 months of probation. 200 hours of community service. Restitution. The full $34,000 my insurance company had paid out, plus my deductible. And the restraining order stayed. Permanent now. Not temporary. Which meant the next violation wouldn't be another warning. It would be jail. Real jail. Not holding cells and paperwork. Consequences that didn't come with exit strategies. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard the final numbers. Just steady. Like something had finally aligned with reality. The real turning point wasn't the criminal case. It was what came after. Subrogation. Reeves had explained it early on, but I didn't fully appreciate it until I watched it happen. Once the insurance company paid out my claim, they didn't just absorb the loss. They went after her. Aggressively. Relentlessly. Professionally, I didn't have to argue. Didn't have to negotiate. Didn't have to listen to excuses. I forwarded documents. They did the rest. Letters. Deadlines. Formal demands. Escalation. No emotion. No fatigue. Just pressure. Consistent. Unavoidable. From what I heard later, Vesper didn't have the money. Of course she didn't. People who force their way into other people's homes rarely have contingency plans. Her parents ended up covering most of it. Not quietly. Not easily. There were rumors, selling investments, moving money around, family hardship, posts on social media that got sympathy from people who had no idea what had actually happened. I didn't respond to any of it. Didn't need to, because the truth didn't live in their posts. It lived in the paperwork. The civil side wrapped shortly after. Same numbers. Formalized. Enforceable. Permanent. Everything tied neatly to consequences she could not talk her way out of. For the first time since the fire, I slept through the entire night without waking. Noelle was different. Messier. Not criminal. But not harmless either. Reeves handled it with the same quiet efficiency. A formal demand letter. Defamation. Harassment. Not guaranteed to win in court, but enough to make things uncomfortable. Enough to force her into a position where ignoring it would only make it worse. She tried, of course. Ignored the first letter. Posted something vague about toxic family and being threatened. Kept performing. Until the follow-up came. More direct. Less patient. More real. She folded within a week. The retraction post went up on her page with wording Reeves provided. Pinned. 30 days. No emotional framing. No soft language. Just a clear admission that her previous statements were false. And a payment. $750 toward my legal fees. It wasn't about the money. It was about the shift. Watching someone who had spent her life treating consequences like optional suggestions realize, in real time, that they weren't. That was something I didn't think I would ever see. My mother never apologized. Not once. In her version of events, I had overreacted. Escalated. Destroyed something that could have been resolved within the family. which translated meant handled quietly, minimized, ignored. My father sent one message about 3 months later. Hope you're doing okay. I read it, then put my phone down. Didn't reply. Because being present while everything happened and doing nothing to stop it didn't earn a conversation afterward. It earned distance. 8 months after the fire, the kitchen was finished. Better than before. Quartz countertops instead of granite. New cabinets. Upgraded appliances. Cleaner lines. Brighter light. There's something strange about rebuilding. You don't recreate what was there. You build something new on top of it. Something shaped by what you learned the hard way. I stood in the doorway the first morning it was done, coffee in hand, and looked at it for a long time. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was mine again. Fully. No shared assumptions. No borrowed access. No quiet expectations that I would eventually give in if someone pushed hard enough. I installed cameras at every entrance. Smart locks. Alerts for every movement near the door. Copies of the restraining order in places I could access quickly. Reeves's number saved as a favorite. Not because I expected trouble, but because I understood now that preparation wasn't paranoia. It was protection. I heard things about Vesper, through mutual acquaintances, through the kind of distant, secondhand information that drifts through social circles whether you want it to or not. She had roommates now, couldn't afford her own place, complained constantly about people disrespecting her space, food going missing, messes appearing, someone's boyfriend staying over without asking, using her things, ignoring boundaries. The irony wasn't subtle. It was almost precise, like the universe had decided to teach her the exact lesson she had refused to learn the first time. She even posted something about respecting shared spaces once. It didn't go well. People remembered. Screenshots exist. They don't disappear just because someone changes the story. There were rumors she had done something similar before. Different city, different man. Showed up with luggage, refused to leave, got paid to go away. $2,000. A quick win. A reinforced pattern, until she tried it with me. The difference wasn't me being stronger or smarter. It was simpler than that. I didn't negotiate. I treated it like what it was. A legal problem, not a relationship issue. And once you do that, people like her run out of moves very quickly. Noelle moved in with a boyfriend a few months later. I heard it wasn't going well. He had rules, expected things, didn't bend easily. She called him controlling. I called it unfamiliar territory. We don't speak, and I don't miss it. The house is quiet now. Not empty. Just mine. When I make coffee in the morning, I don't think about the fire anymore. Not first. I think about how everything in that room exists because someone ignored the word no, and what it took to make that word mean something again. Because that's the part nobody talks about. Boundaries aren't real until they're enforced. And enforcement always costs something. Time, energy, relationships, comfort, illusions. But once you pay that cost, you don't unlearn it. You don't go back. And you never again confuse access with permission. Because the difference between the two is everything.